Welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show on 94.7 The Pulse. Music, interviews, news, and, well, two blokes chatting. Now, here are the two blokes.
Feel better.
I do. Who have we got on the line? We have got a gentleman, ironically, by the name of David Parkin. And funny, we were talking to Russell Morris about how all he is of a tradesman. I've just found David Parkin in the roof of his house fixing a hole in the roof. How good's that? Parko, good morning.
G'day, Rob and Neil.
Great
I had to get off the ladder.
It's quite amazing.
I'm glad you've done that. We don't want to in the middle of the interview.
Great to have you back. There's so much to talk about every time you come on. I want to jam three things into the 13 minute or 12 minutes we got left. Coaching transitions. Yours was quite a famous one that worked really, really well at Carlton, very smooth. There's been some that haven't worked so well. What's the secret of a good one, David?
That's a very good question, Rob. I've been a part of what people forget that's been happening for a long time. The great Jack Hale made a transition for John Kennedy to take over. He handed him his job when he was still in contract. And the great John Kennedy, the man, gave me his job. I had no idea that it was in the wind. We were at pre-season in 1977. And as we walked to our cars after a session in Kew, he came over from the boot of his car, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Oh, by the way, you'll be the coach of the Hawthorn Football Club tomorrow." So, and I was, and he stayed and sort of helped me in a sense and then left me on my own. So it's been going on in some shape or form for a long time. It's just not been publicly understood in the manner which it has. So what happened with Brits and Brits had coached the team, people don't understand, but basically 99 and 2000, the Carlton Football Club was coached by Wayne Britton. I was there and got paid as the coach and got named as the coach, but the bloke who was doing all the work was in fact Wayne Britton, and he was able to take over. The sad story, and I think Wayne would admit to this, is great. He was the best football person in terms of strategic approach and tactics and all that I have ever played with, coached or whatever. But Wayne failed a bit when it came to the public issue of dealing with committees and boards and the public and that sort of stuff. So the sad thing, he lost his job a couple of years later. So it has varying successes. I'm delighted that we're getting mature enough to talk about it, have an open conversation and be honest with people as the change has come about, as in the case with Sam Mitchell and Alistair Clarkson. I think that's been, I don't know what's gone on behind, but at least publicly in the same way that Bucks was able to transition out of the job at Collingwood. I think they're being handled in a public sense, Neil and Rob, so much better.
Yeah, I just wondered about, a lot of them have worked smoothly and it's behind-the-scenes committee stuff. Interestingly, you worked under Jack Elliott, high-profile, big ego. Jeff Kennett certainly has the same, and Eddie Maguire presided over the messy one at Collingwood. Is it important that leader of the club and that committee structure is really on board with the two individuals that are at the core of the matter?
Rob, you're talking about a different set of circumstances now. Jack and I, it took a while for Jack to understand that he was responsible for running the club and that I'd look after the coaching of the team. We actually got that in place. We worked extremely. He was a great president for me in the role that I had, I'd have to say. He supported me in everything. As long as I could provide the argument, he would support me at 100%, so I had no problem with that. He did sack me too, suddenly, and at the time I was going out the door, I was pretty annoyed, to be truthful. I think I was reappointed on the Monday and sacked on the Thursday. I'm still trying to work out what I did between Monday and Thursday. But the fact was that Robert Ward became available, and at that time was probably the right replacement to do the job at Carlton. If you remember, I got his job at Fitzroy in those days. So, it's interesting, isn't it, how this issue and these issues are being handled in the modern game.
So, David, with Alistair Clarkson, the press is quite strong around the fact that, you know, he might end up somewhere else. As a club, would they not embrace it clearly, but would they feel comfortable if he was to be approached by another club to take over from next year?
Well, certainly I can't speak for the board of the Hawthorn Football Club, but I can tell you a couple of clubs who you and I know very well know what I'd be doing right now. I think without exception, Alistair Clarkson has been the most efficient, effective coach in the history of the game. When you think of how the game now has been engineered by those who look after it to ensure that clubs don't win successive premierships and put things into place to make it happen. You can talk about Collingwood and Melbourne in the 50s and 60s, etc., but they were dominant clubs with no interference. You think how hard it is to get there and win one now when the engineering of the competition is such that it's preventing you from doing it. So if he's finishing, and knowing Al a bit, I would have thought that family and friends and the farm and a few other things now are becoming a priority in his life, and I can see it functioning in such a way that he will transition out. But certainly if I were a couple of clubs that are looking for coaches at the moment, I'd be on my bike at 100 mile an hour trying to convince him right now to come over and start coaching in the 2022 season.
Yeah, we're sort of working on that, and that's why the potential of where Jeff Kennett fits in with all this as to whether what we're being presented is actually the facts of what happened. But I'll be intrigued to see how it all plays out. Yeah,
Neil, Rob, I think the facts are probably reasonably accurate. How the players, Sam's one of my closest friends, and I think there's some doubt even in Sam's mind that he is actually ready for the job. I think, and he hopes that the transition will be made on the timeline that has been presented publicly. I think for him and the Hawthorn Football Club, that would be probably the best way for it to happen. But I think there's a fair bit of water, guys, to go under the bridge before that becomes a reality.
On that same theme, David, I learnt this week something that quite shocked me, and you'll be able to explain this on exactly the theme you're talking about, rebuilding when things are against you. You're on the list at Hawthorn when they won their first premiership in 1961. You captained the side when they won 10 years later. I was staggered to find that in the middle, you were wooden spooners in 1965. How did that transition happen in the 60s, where without salary caps and drafts and things, to go down so relatively quickly and yet come up so quickly?
We came up quickly, guys, on the back of the zoning that we put into place at that time. That was the difference. We had local zones, etc., and I had to play for the Hawthorn Footy Club because I lived 15 metres from the ground. I loved Melbourne and wanted to be there, but that wasn't to be. Well, the zoning became critical. You think of Carlton's history and Hawthorn's history. Basically, the rise and the success they had came directly off the fantastic players that Hawthorn got from their zone, West Gippsland, etc., and in Carlton's case from the Bendigo region. They are the direct influence, if you like, or impact that allowed those two clubs to have the success at that time that they had.
I guess the other thing is too, when you are sitting at number one and then you drop to the wooden spoon these days, you've got to drop 18 spots. In those days, you only had to drop 12, didn't you?
Well, that is a fact I hadn't thought about. That's mathematically absolutely correct.
Nice to be corrected. Something David, this late into the show.
David, what was it like for you as a player during that period of time when you come into the club? They're built and finally the premiership success, and then you've slowly declined. And I know the sort of character you are, you would have been involved in the build. But how did you handle the decline?
Well, not well, but I hadn't been a part of that kind of history. The only good thing was being in the back pocket. The only time I won a premiership, was the best and first, was in the year that we ran last, because the ball was down my end all the time. When we were 16, I was having a bit of trouble because the ball was never down. It was up to Peter Hudson and people like that. Look, it's interesting because I went through complete gamut of success and bewilderment and all of those things in between. When in 1961 they happened to be there as a player who played the last game, they couldn't get in the team for the finals, rightfully so. And I had to wait, till 63, and we got annihilated in 1963, and I was the worst player on the ground in that grand final. So you can imagine how hungry I was and how determined I was when we got to the 70s and the opportunity came. I'll tell you, I was carrying everybody around on my back at that time. The young blokes went on and had fantastic success after my time, but I needed them at that time. So the Matthews, Knights, Scotts and people who came into that team were a pretty special group of players and served Hawthorn extremely well.
Passing this week, sadly, of Sergio Silvani, of definitely a blue-collar type play, which was interesting in a side like Carlton that had a lot of real silky talent, but very rough around the edges. But how effective was he actually?
Well, I think he won best and fairest in premiership years, so at least while he mightn't have been the prettiest player, I think the generations that followed, that Stephen and now the other boys played with some different talent and athleticism to the father and grandfather. But I played against Serge and he was unbelievably strong and around the ball. He was probably the most successful ruck rover type person in the game for a decade. So he, with Nichols, probably Gallagher, Nichols and Silvani, probably became, in my opinion, almost like Scott, Matthews and Crimmins, one of the best, what do you call them, following divisions the game has ever seen. And the success that Carlton had on the back of Serge's input was quite phenomenal. They have been an unbelievable family. Serge was a assistant coach with me, a member of match committee, the most loyal person you could ever find, and worked exceedingly hard in all the roles that he had over so many years at the Carlton Football Club. I mean, he'd been missed terribly by the family. I can imagine they'll miss him terribly. But we in football who've known the man will miss him as a person as well.
Yeah, interesting that he, compared to John Kennedy, who was a beacon in a club that struggled, but Serge was a beacon in a club where he was surrounded by stars, but still, it probably goes to his grave, sadly, unheralded as to what he contributed. Yeah,
look, I think hopefully that will come out. Sadly that he's gone, but that will come out on behalf of the family, because he was so supportive as an assistant coach to me and a member of match committee. He was hard. I think Stephen would have played Neil and Robert probably 12 months before that. His father, he was ready to play, but his father refused to allow him to play. He was on match committee making those decisions, so it took us a year of pain and persistence to actually get Stephen into the team, and the history that follows shows you how good he was.
Definitely. Parko, thank you very much again. Get back to the hole in the roof. Really appreciate your time as always, and we look forward to our next chat already.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Rob. I enjoyed it.
All the best.
Thanks, David. All the best.
Thanks, Rob. I enjoyed it.
All the best.
Thanks, David. All the best.
Thanks, Rob. I enjoyed it.